My name is Ryan Preston at BBR. I'm a partner and director on our advisory team. We're here today to talk about trust and estate planning for founders and entrepreneurs. Michael Arline from Patterson Belknap, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. This is one of my favorite topics. As you mentioned, I'm a partner at Patterson Belknap. I've been there 23 years. I head the Trust and Estates group, and I also head a special group that we have there that we've branded as Founder Focus, which is a special multidisciplinary group of lawyers focused on the legal needs of founders and entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And as a trust and estates lawyer, my role in that group is generally to talk with founders about estate planning, and in particular tax planning, and in particular using trust structures and other sorts of estate planning structures to reduce taxes on exits, on liquidity events, on secondaries, et cetera.
One of the things we always talk about is that timing is so critical with this type of planning. And when founders and entrepreneurs are so busy and focused on doing what is the most important thing in building that enterprise and striving towards achieving that value, what sometimes gets left off the table is, well, what happens when I get there? And so what we're going to talk about a little bit today is how to actually maximize that achievement, how to maximize the value from that achievement, and avoid some of these tax pitfalls that are so prevalent for people that might not be aware of these strategies, these planning strategies.
Absolutely.
So maybe we could start with the income tax side, which is the more near-term piece. You know, what happens when you realize value that day through a merger, an IPO, some sort of sale? What are some of the techniques that can be employed or that you've employed to tackle that problem?
When I talk to founders, I normally explain to them that trust structures can be used to accomplish some income tax objectives. We have to talk about Section 1202 of the code, QSBS, or Qualified Small Business Stock. Most founders have heard of this at some point, and essentially, if the criteria are met under Section 1202, it allows a founder to exclude up to $10 million on the gain of sale of stock. It's really the greater of 10 million or 10 times the founder's investment, but most founders are not investing more than $1 million in their business. And that is a full avoidance of federal tax. So if the tax on the long-term gain is 23.8%, that's $2,380,000 of tax savings. And in most states, with some notable exceptions, California being the most notable, but in most states you're also avoiding the state-level income tax, which here in New York, you know, if you live in New York City, could be 13%. So then you're saving another 1.3 million. You don't need to set up a trust to achieve to qualify for this exemption. But what you can do with trusts is you can potentially create multiple exemptions, which is known as stacking exemptions. Mm-hmm. And 1202 says that if stock that otherwise qualifies as QSBS is gifted to someone else, that someone else, the recipient, steps into the shoes of the person making the gift in terms of the status as QSBS and also the holding period. There's a 5-year holding period. You have to hold stock for 5 years before it becomes QSBS. Mm-hmm. And if you gift the stock to a trust, the trust, if you've held the stock for 4 years, the trust will be deemed to have held the stock for 4 years. And so creating each person who receives or trust that receives stock, if the trust is properly qualified, itself can exclude up to $10 million of gains. Mm-hmm. So a simple example would be if you have, say, 2 children and you set up the right kind of trust for each of those children and you gift QSBS, qualified small business stock, to those trusts. Now maybe, as a family, you can pay no tax on up to $30 million, $10 million for yourself, $10 million for each of your children. And that, if you live in New York City, would save you something like $7 million of tax. So that's one income tax objective of trust structuring. Stacking or multiplying QSBS exemptions and structuring trusts that pay no state level income tax, I think are the two sort of headline benefits of the kind of planning that we implement.
Yeah. So it's really a holistic effort to bring all that together. So once you do get to the promised land as a founder, now you have the enviable problem of building on top of this wealth and preserving and protecting it and compounding it over time. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about risk return, what's going to be appropriate for a founder once they extract that value and are able to set that aside and either pursue other interests or go on doing something completely different, maybe just living on that wealth from there. So depending on those goals or objectives, we're thinking about the risk return spectrum, where it should exist for different entities and different stakeholders in this new framework that founders are now existing in. And of course, you get to that point where the estate tax can become a real issue. Today, it's anywhere from 20 to 40%, 40% for most of our clients, plus the state estate tax, leads you to, again, this sort of 50% number. It's a real problem. And there's gifting that can happen. There's limitations on that, of course. So we may want to do some additional planning beyond that. Where do you start with folks that have these types of situations on the estate planning side?
Yeah. The same kinds of trusts that can be designed to achieve these income tax goals that we spoke about before also can have what some young people might think of as a byproduct benefit, but ultimately will become very important, which is to create wealth that's outside that founder's estate and therefore not subject to the estate tax, also known as the death tax, which is that up to 50% tax that you mentioned on transferring wealth at your death, essentially to whoever you want to transfer to. There's no tax on transfers generally to your spouse or charity, but ultimately if the wealth is passing on to your children or other family members, it's going to be hit with that tax. And so if you can locate assets inside certain kinds of trust structures, and those trust structures through investments, but also through tax planning, can grow a lot, then if you look forward to the moment of your passing, and you look at what's inside those structures, and you multiply that by 50%, that's the tax that you might be avoiding by having built that wealth inside a trust versus building it inside your own name. And these structures can actually often be built to be multi-generational, meaning that the trust doesn't just end at your death and your children get the money, but can endure potentially for many generations, where that avoidance of the 50% tax, which is a tax that applies generally at each generation, can be avoided when the money goes from your children to your grandchildren, or your grandchildren to your great-grandchildren. So the effects of the tax avoidance or minimization can really compound over time and sort of really goose the returns that you would otherwise get from smart investing.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool for sure. I think oftentimes when we think about and we talk to clients about this type of structure, the concern is, well, do I have access to it? What does this mean for me? And how do I think about my lifetime? And I think this is an important conversation, and it's again, a very personal conversation, and it sort of leads us down paths of, well, what do you need for your lifetime at your age and your personal interests and goals, and how much do you think you want to give to your kids today and down the road. But there's also creative ways to deal with that, where you can separate from a tax perspective assets to a trust for the benefit of your kids and grandkids, and still have ways to access it. And so that's an important feature that families need to realize, that it's not necessarily one or the other, that there's some sophisticated planning that separates things from a tax perspective, but also gives you the ability to use that money during your lifetime.
The earlier the planning is done, sort of the more effective. And part of the reason for that, and we didn't talk about this, is that when you transfer stock into these structures, it's usually a gift, and gifts are limited in how many gifts or how much you can gift during your lifetime. That's known as the gift or the estate exemption, and it changes with politics. At the moment, from a federal perspective, as you know, it's about $13 million, which should be plenty to transfer low-value, privately owned founder stock, often as much as you want.
Sure.
The fact that it's a gift is largely the reason that it makes sense to make these transfers earlier in the life cycle of the company, because as the company goes on and is successful, the value of the gift would get larger, and you'd be able to transfer fewer shares and to capture less of the upside in those shares inside the trust structure.
Much more effective at $1 per share than $10 per share.
Exactly. Now, taken to its logical extreme, the ideal time actually to put stock into a trust is when the company is actually founded. And as I mentioned, that rarely happens, because usually when we get the call or the client is speaking to you, they've already founded the company and it's going well, which is why they're reaching out to an attorney or a wealth advisor. But sometimes we get lucky, usually with a serial entrepreneur, and they learn their lesson the first time around, that you got to talk to the planners earlier in the life cycle. And if we get one of those people who hasn't yet formed their company, what we might recommend is that they create some trusts for children, spouse, parents, etc., and to put those trusts right in the cap table on day one to acquire stock in the company, which at that point is effectively worth zero. It's worth par value, which is typically a hundredth of a penny per share. For that same reason, there's also another possible thing that can be done that can sometimes be really effective, which is to have someone create a trust for the benefit of the founder, often the founder's parents. And that doesn't mean the parents have to actually do anything. The founder's own lawyer can create a trust with the parents' permission for the founder's benefit, with the parents as creator. And the parents could make a very modest gift, $1,000 maybe, into the trust, and then the trust would have the capital to buy stock in the company. And then that trust can be for the benefit of the founder. So before I said that the founder can't usually easily create a trust for his or her own benefit. But here, because the parents are creating a trust, it can have all of these tax benefits. And because the trust is coming into the company on formation, the cost of that trust buying the shares is incredibly low. So founders and entrepreneurs should think about contacting a lawyer or some other sort of advisor to talk about the planning, ideally even before the company is created.
Absolutely, and the seed capital is a tremendous opportunity. So for anybody that has the wherewithal to think about what that could potentially mean for their personal, but also their long-term goals as it relates to their family, and the potential tax savings by dividing that up even by a small portion, we've seen yield absolutely tremendous results down the road. So I totally agree. That's a fantastic way to take advantage of these types of strategies and thinking really early on in the life cycle of the business.
Yeah.
One of the things we mentioned at the top of the conversation that warrants, I think, a little bit of discussion is charitable charitable strategies. So it's something that we spend a lot of time on at BBR as investment advisors, and I'm sure you do as well. That is a huge potential tax savings, but of course you are really letting go of that money. That is a personal gift that is completely out of your control at that point, other than for charitable purposes. In sort of the traditional sense, there's the private foundation option, but in more recent times, I think the easier and probably more modern tool is the donor advised fund, which has proliferated and become a really good tool for wealth creators and also, regular people. This isn't a high bar type of strategy. You can access it for $1,000 even at some of the bigger custodians, and they're really flexible. Giving money to charity, generally speaking, is going to allow you to remove any sort of offset income tax in any given year. So that's something that's also part of the conversation. What would you let people walk away with as the one thing they remember from this conversation broadly?
I think the key message here is that timing is important, and that it is possible to wait too long to do this planning, and that the earlier the planning is done, sometimes the more effective it is. So I would encourage founders and entrepreneurs to identify the right advisors earlier in the life cycle of their company, take the time out of their busy day to have a conversation, understand what the options are. It may not be the right time to implement something, but it's important to know, what the options are and how those options can help you in the future, and then you can implement them when the time is right. You don't want to be in a position where you find out that there are things you should have done a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you just didn't know that you should do them, and now the opportunity is missed.
Right, and having a conversation is easy. Reach out to people that you might know in your network. Certainly you're available, we're available for those conversations, and we know folks that can help if we're not the right people. And like you said, when you're ready to engage officially, we're then there, and we can prepare ahead of time and really put these types of strategies to work in an effective way when the founder or the entrepreneur is ready.